Okay, today I'm in Brayford near Barnstable with trainer Victor Dartnall. Thank you very much, Mr. Dartnall, for agreeing to talk to us today. Apparently, you've always been in a racing family. Your father was a professional jockey, and you rode yourself as an amateur. Is there anything you want to tell us about your father's career?
Well, my father rode as in pony racing in Devon in the West Country before the war, and then went pony racing, which was organised in those days at Northolt Park and various venues. He was very organised, and he was very successful at that. He then became associated with Bill Whiteman, W.G.R. Whiteman, who was later became a very famous trainer of flat handicappers. And indeed, he actually had Halloween in his yard, the famous chaser, 3-mile chaser. But my father became involved with him, and the two of them went from organised pony racing to racing under rules. In those days, they weren't allowed to do both. And then he was 17 when the war came, and so he lost his sort of 6 best years in the war, and started up again. He was captured by the Germans, and Bill Whiteman spent years in a prisoner of war camp, captured by the Japanese. But they then got together after the war, and if you read Bill Whiteman's book, my father's one of 3 people who actually started with him after the war, and he then returned, but his weight started to climb, and he was he became a national hunt jockey, and in fact he rode Halloween in his first ever professional race, fell at the first. Upon Fred Winters rode him, but he rode out his claim in those days, which wasn't a bad thing to do. He also, in that time, he broke his back and rode winners afterwards, which very few jockeys apparently have done. He retired. I remember seeing him ride once under rules. At Fontwell, and he retired in the early 50s. Later trained in a small way up in the Cotswolds, but that's where I got the bug, and I started riding point to pointing.
Can you started your training career in '98?
Yes, well, I rode as an amateur up to the early 80s. I rode mostly point to pointing, but rode quite a bit under rules. Then my brother also did the same, but he turned professional. In the early 90s, 94, I moved down to my Devon house, which my wife and I bought a small farm in North Devon, Schutzcombe Farm, which is where I am now. I bought it in 87 and moved down in 94. We treated it as a holiday home up to then, but I gave up my job as an farm and estate manager, which I was in for 24 years, mostly the latter 21 of those years, 22 years up at Marlborough. So I ran the Temple Farm estate and Barbary Castle estate, and I actually was involved in laying a lot of the new gallops that Alan King has up there. I actually laid the Barbary point-to-point course when I was there, and I was clerk of course for the first 10 meetings. But then circumstances changed, and I was able to work for myself. So my wife and I moved down in 94, and with the idea of training point-to-pointers initially. We started off with 4 point-to-pointers, and I was very lucky when the first season I had some good ones. I had some good contacts, which is everything in life is really due to contacts, and David Minton was one, the bloodstock agent, and I approached David to buy my first horse, which is a horse called Wolfwinter, and he said there's only one horse to buy in Ireland to go point-to-pointing, it's Wolfwinter. Sent me over there and bought him, and he was he did very well for us. And then for the first 2 or 3 years he was involved in, and he bought point-to-pointers and hunter chasers for me, and got some really good horses, horses like King Taurus, Chili Paw, who was he won 16 races. Sylvain Mist, who was almost unbeatable. I retired him at the age of 13. He'd won his last 7 then. He was a very, very good 2.5 mile hunter chaser. And of course Butler John, we bought him from at Ascot Sales, and he won 26 points for us. He won 28 races in all, but he was national champion for us. He was national champion the year after Far Too Touchy was national champion here. So my years 2 and 3, pointing, I had 2 national champions, which was a very good start. And the reason I went under rules, I thought I couldn't really keep going at that pace. It was difficult to get people to come in to pay to have horses in pointing, because there's absolutely no money in it, even far less than there is under national hunt rules. And I thought I'd been extremely fortunate, so I moved off and I took a license out. The other factor was they were on the horizon, they were wanting to charge £3,000 plus to get a license, so I thought I'd nip in quick and got it for next to nothing. So that's what happened. That's why I went in 98. And it was bit of a, I knew it would be a shock because we had cheap horses really for that game. We never have really spent a lot of money on our horses, but we kicked off pretty well. Then we had a few leaner years as we were trying to bring young horses through, and then things gradually built from there really.
So what would be your most proudest, most memorable moment in your career so far as a trainer?
Well, I think Lord Sam at Punchestown was something else. I mean, I went over with my brother, we took him out there in the lorry. He absolutely drank me under the table, and we visited every pub for the 2 days we were waiting for it, and I never drank so much Guinness in my life. I don't drink that much, but and anyways, we went there, and he won the novices chase, and by doing that he became the highest rated 2.5 mile novice chaser in England and Ireland for that year. Every year in the classifications you see his name there. Lord Sam won 9 of his first 10 races, and the only time he was beaten was in the Sunlance Hurdle at Cheltenham, and he was beaten by a horse called Hardy Eustace, who won the next 2 champion hurdles. And we had a fairly we were given our main jockey, the jockey who rode him most of the time was Jim Colotti, and he was told he had to ride for his retainer, Henrietta Knight, 3 days before the Sunlance Hurdle, and Lord Sam was unbeaten up to that point. And anyway, the chap who, I won't say who rode him, but he rode him, and he didn't know the horse. It seemed to ask everybody other than us about how to ride him, and he dropped him out when he shouldn't. And things didn't go right. He hit the front coming down the hill hard on the bridle, and then just didn't quite get home. Beaten 6 lengths or something, which was very unfortunate, really. But haven't had one like him since. But that's always the way. I wish in a way I'd had him a bit later in life.
Now you're known to be a patient trainer. Does that depend on having patient owners?
Well, I think obviously you can't be patient if the owner won't let you be patient, and I think those sort of people, I've had the old one like that, but then they're not. They obviously go somewhere else if they I always put the horse first and the future of the horse, look after his future, and that's just you've got to work together. I mean, it's no good if you've got an owner that wants one thing and the trainer wants the other. That's going to be disaster, and it's not going to last. So I suppose that's leveled itself out over the years.
Now, it's a glorious setting up here. How many horses can you take? How many boxes?
Well, we had over 40 at one stage. We could have more than that, but we got up. So we got up to that level, but we're down to 20. So now, and I think a lot of people have. It comes and goes, but I think it's more important than numbers is what you've got there. And every year. Apart from this year, I didn't have an open day this year, but we always used to produce a program, and I looked at a program of 7 or 8 years ago, and I had 40 horses, and I tell you, 20 of them were absolutely useless. So they don't do anybody any good. So it's more important to get the quality up than the numbers. And I think this year, although we haven't got so many, there are some exciting ones amongst them.
And I read, once again, doing my research, that you used to exercise your horses on Woolacombe Beach, but then they banned you.
Well, they think they've banned me, but they can't. We exercise our right with a bridle path that runs alongside, and the chap at the other end of the beach is very, very welcoming. So at which point we cross through the mists, Devonshire mists, to get from one part of the beach onto the other. All I can say is there's nobody around. They wouldn't know we've been there, because so they might think they've banned us. But we're not so obvious. We don't park at a normal spot there. But in all honesty, we used to go down when we had a period of quite severe frosts in the country as a whole. The last 2 years we haven't had a frost. And anyway, I've actually converted my wood chip gallop into it's a carpet gallop now, and my cantering facility is carpet, and that doesn't freeze. At least it doesn't freeze in anywhere near the same degree that wood chip does. And so we would have no need to go there, except I do have one of my owners loves her horse, her old chaser, to go there before he runs every time. So we do take him down, hack him along the bridle path there, and have a fiddle about, and that's it. In actual fact, the people that saw us on the beach, they loved it to see horses, because often horses were quite well known. I mean, Exmoor Ranger, who won the big chase at 3 Mile Chase at Ascot, the Ascot Gold Cup they call it, in November. He won that, and I remember he was down there once. People also, Giles Cross was fancy for the National one year. He was down there, and people still write to me and say how they remembered seeing them down there, but it's just the people who manage it don't feel that they don't want horses there. Anyway, we move on.
Okay, now I've got to make the studies the form, and he tells me that if you backed your horses on the all-weather and in bumpers blind in the last 5 years, you'd have been a nice few quid up. But there's been fewer all-weather runners this year. Does it just depend on the horses you get, the type of races you run in?
Well, I've only really had cheapies that I've run on the flat. And I've actually decided this year that I'm actually not going to do that so much. So I went out and bought a couple of yearlings, and hopefully we'll start off with something that nobody else has had a go at. And so there is a little bit of a change there. But on the bumper issue, I started off by we had a lot of runners in bumpers, but I very quickly decided, I remember I ran one filly in 4 bumpers, and Jim Colotti got off of her and said, you want to run this over hurdles, and while she's learning she'll be handicapped. And that was the best bit of advice. And so I'll run them in 1 bumper now. Everything will have a run in a bumper to give them experience. I do like doing that, because my one horse, the owner didn't like bumpers and insisted we didn't go that route, so we sent him over hurdles. He absolutely froze when he got on the track. I legged Jim up at Uttoxeter. He was first out at the paddock. I went to the stands, and they all came past me, and my horse wasn't there. And he eventually came trotting past the stands with his tail in the air, absolutely, totally mesmerised by the whole experience. And he pulled up at the 3rd, and it was only because he needed that experience on a racecourse. And he went on and he won 2 hurdle races, and I think he won his 3rd race, so it wasn't him. But it's nice to take horses away to give them a racecourse gallop, but it's equally nice to take them and give them a run in a bumper, and that's what I do. So they're not all bumper horses, and they've got jobs to do later in life, but we haven't had the top bumper horses a recent time, although we had a very good one last year at Holden Hill, and I've got some smart ones this year, I think, but they all, they don't all, they're not all good enough. And bumpers have become very competitive recently, and I don't gallop. I always train them with a view that they're going to improve and allow them to improve. So I don't gallop the get the last bit out of them at home by any manner of means. So I think in recent times we haven't had the performance. I remember one commentator said, "Oh, I remember the time when Victor Dartnall's horses were feared in bumpers," but there's been just a slight. We don't. We just do it a bit differently now, and for the good of the horse, I think.
Okay, now, so how long would you spend with your head in the form book trying to map out a career? Well, not a career, map out a route for a horse's season?
I will do it don't sit down for hours, but I don't have enough horses to do that. But if I had 100 horses, I or somebody would have to do that. But I tend to eye up races that are going to be suitable and have an idea. I don't sit down for hours. I just do it as I go along, really.
Okay, and how big a factor would betting be for the yard you line one up?
Contrary to popular belief, no, I don't. I've never had a betting account in my life. I've had one or two big bets, but and they worked out. But I mean, everything's all kosher, but betting doesn't give me any sort of a kick at all. The only thing is if I've got one that I think is unbelievably priced, then that will tempt me to have but it's got to be a big price to tempt me to 10, 12 to 1 or above to tempt me to put anything on, and I get enough of a kick out of watching them run. Without, I don't need that. The prospect of losing money doing it.